Well, first of all, as UNDP, we have a very strong commitment to working with young people. And if you work on the African continent, if you're not working with young people, you're missing the majority of the population. So for us, it is particularly that age group between school leavers, the beginnings of looking for either tertiary training, education, be it a university degree or otherwise, and then entering into the labor market, the job market, the world of business also, and earning a livelihood. We have many programs across Africa today. Youth Connect Africa, for example, is by now something that began in Rwanda and has become an annual event where thousands of young people from across Africa come together. They inspire each other with their success stories, because for every failure, there are thousands of success stories also on the continent. Bringing people together, allowing them to learn from each other, and then investing also in their ability to become social entrepreneurs, more skilled people in the digital era, is one way in which we contribute. Here in Morocco, we've had the privilege also of working with the Minister of Employment, and just over the last year and a half, there has been a massive program of creating 100,000 jobs that the government of Morocco led and invited UNDP to be part of it. But when I arrived, I spent half a day with my team, the UNDP team in Rabat. And actually, one of the questions that we asked ourselves and that I was asked, how can we make sure that young people are not only invited into a meeting as a stakeholder, but they actually become partners, they co-design, they co-create the kinds of programs that will benefit them but also benefit the nation. And that, I think, is where UNDP itself has to also continuously learn how best to connect to young people. It's not the people who walk into our office, it's the innovators, it's the entrepreneurs, it's the inventors that we find in communities, in their garages or in their homes, who have ideas and who have the energy to try and make an idea become reality. We now have an innovation lab, an accelerator lab, not only here in Morocco, but in fact in 95 countries around the world, where we invest in trying to understand where is innovation in a country coming from. How can we help government to understand how better to promote that innovation? And very quickly you also come to technology. Young people and the digital era go hand in hand. The future of development is going to change in every respect as a result of digital technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. The realm of possibility is endless, but we also have to invest in it. Digital public infrastructure. How do we make sure that not only those who can afford to pay, but in fact to make access to the internet, for instance, something that is accessible because it is affordable and people can actually work with it. So in so many respects, our work as UNDP, dedicated to the national development of a country, has to every day ask itself the question, are we reaching out to the people who are already building the economy of tomorrow today? It's a fair question, and take my own example. I'm not one of the poorest people, but when we meet here, there is, in a sense, a set of issues we are trying to address that in their consequence obviously impacts on people, wealthy, poor people. But in the first instance is, for instance, how do we deal with the global debt problem? In the way that it needs to be discussed here, it involves some of the richest nations, it involves some of the largest financial institutions. These debates are complex and they are difficult. It doesn't mean that the public should not be engaged, that young people should not have a voice and a seat at the table. And so I think every meeting should be challenged and questioned as to whether there is room for normal citizens, young people, women, girls, boys, to have a chance to become part of this conversation. Obviously, when the finance ministers sit with their financial experts and economists in a G20 meeting in this hall here, most people will probably walk out after 5 minutes and say, this is so boring, I don't want to deal with this. But that's not the point. We can have a room right next door to that meeting, and there we can talk about what are the consequences of a choice not to address the debt issue? What is the consequence of very high cost of capital and borrowing for developing countries in this particular moment? And it doesn't take much imagination, and people will say, yes, I can relate to that because I can see what's happening in my community, in my shop, in my country. So I don't want to sound as if it's easy, but every institution, whether it's UNDP, our colleagues in the World Bank or in the IMF, we have to constantly ask ourselves, are we creating that space where people can influence our thinking? Now, I believe I have the privilege of traveling as part of my role of leading UNDP literally all over the world. I meet people who every day give me an inspiration of what they're able to do. So even though I may sit in New York, leading an organization like ours that works in 170 countries is constantly learning also. So we are not as cut off as some would think. And still, I would argue we could do a lot more to make ourselves accessible, particularly to young people. Maybe, first of all, a kind of self-respect. I think the fact that the whole world has agreed to come to Morocco, to Marrakech, and spend the better part of a week here to do their business, which is to govern the World Bank and the IMF, but also to bring together the world's financial experts, economic experts, I think should make any country proud, especially when you're able to organize a meeting that really functions so efficiently and so smoothly. But there are other benefits also. The rest of the world is learning a lot about the Kingdom of Morocco. The world is able to understand what it means to have a vision and to have also the ability to implement policies. You know, Morocco has many examples of extraordinary development interventions over the years, starting, a decade and a half ago with the deployment of renewable energy on a scale that Africa had never seen before. In fact, with the technology that many consider to be somewhere in the future. His Majesty and the government basically said, no, we are going to put this in place because our future must include renewable energy, and therefore this is our way of beginning to invest in it. This employment creation program with 100,000 jobs, I traveled to many countries, so many governments have tried to put youth employment, entrepreneurship programs in place. Many of them fail. Here in Morocco, I'm very intrigued to see how is it being done. What is the reason why the success ratio is much higher? And so Morocco begins to influence also the expertise that UNDP can share in other countries. And 10 years down the line, somebody will say, yes, we learned from Morocco 10 years ago, and that's how we achieved what we have now achieved. So I think those are some of the more intangible things. And then, a country that has just had an earthquake, but is a country that depends a lot on tourism, here is the evidence. Morocco is here. Please come back if you were worried, because we are open for business, for tourists, and that will help the economy also. So I think these are three ways in which to think positively about such a meeting, and I hope there will be many other aspects that we haven't covered today.